This Teamer deck is a Dragon Tribal build focused on utilizing and exploiting Miirym's token-generating ability. This vision is achieved through inundating the 99 with mana ramp spells, select mana rocks, various mana accelerators, and treasure token producing effects. The investment in mana resources, paired with numerous card-drawing spells and effects, pay multiple dividends. Miirym can enter play as quickly as possible in the early game, allowing for explosive turns thereafter by getting other powerful dragons onto the battlefield and triggering Miirym's token-generating ability. Although there are cheat-to-play effects included in the deck, dragons are mana-intensive, and an overinvestment in mana resources will help to hedge their mana values. As another benefit, although the 99 offers some protection, a commitment to abundant mana sources allows for Miirym to be recast multiple times if needed during the mid to late game. Through backbreaking synergies among Miirym and the various dragons in the 99, victory can be achieved in a variety of ways, all by outpacing and out-resourcing opponents. Thank you for choosing MTG Burgeoning for your Magic the Gathering content. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and consider becoming a subscriber. Doing so supports the channel and makes you eligible for our various subscriber rewards series. If you would like to support the channel further, then click the link to our Patreon page in the description below. There you can join our ongoing Pack Wars series as a 1-month supporter or ongoing member. Or try joining Pack Wars for free by commenting on every MTG Burgeoning video in a month. We strive to offer creative rewards through our various Patreon tiers. So if Pack Wars isn't for you, then something else will be. Links to our content and various subscriber rewards series can be found in the description below. Send us an email, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. We are your channel for all things Magic. Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. Miirym Sentinel Wyrm is a 6/6 legendary dragon spirit for 3 in Teamer colors. It has flying and ward 2, meaning that any spells or abilities that our opponents control that target Miirym cost an additional 2 generic mana to target our general. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under our control, we create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. The following deck tech is going to showcase a 99 that has been sculpted to exploit Miirym's token-generating ability. The following group of dragons provides us with mana resources, the first of which is going to be Gannix, Astral Hunter, a 3/4 flyer for 4 and a red. Whenever it or another dragon ETBs under our control, we create a treasure token. Please note that Gannix's text does not say non-token dragon, so the tokens created by Miirym's ETB ability will also trigger Gannix. The best case scenario here is that we have our general on our side of the battlefield. We get Gannix into play, creating a second copy that will stick because the copies made by Miirym are not legendary if the original card is legendary, and Gannix is a legendary dragon. Having 2 Gannixes under our side of the battlefield, well, that will just create oodles and oodles of treasure tokens. In this scenario, whenever a dragon will come into play, it will create 2 treasure tokens. And if Miirym is also on our side of the battlefield, the token that's created by Miirym will also create 2 treasure tokens. Speaking of treasure tokens, we also are going to include a copy of Goldspan Dragon, 4/4 flying haste for 3 in double red. Whenever Goldspan attacks or becomes the target of a spell, we will create a treasure token. And treasures we control have tap and sacrifice this treasure, and we add 2 mana of any one color. With Gannix spitting out treasure tokens and the Goldspan Dragon doubling the mana that we can get for them, it should only be a matter of time before we completely overwhelm our opponents. Speaking of overwhelming, Ancient Copper Dragon is a 6/5 flyer for 4 and 2 red that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we roll a d20. We then create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Now, granted, it's not always going to be 20 treasure tokens, but on average, if we roll that d20 1,000 times, we should average 10 treasure tokens each time Ancient Copper Dragon strikes down one of our opponent's life totals. Continuing the theme of treasure tokens, we come up with Old Gnawbone, a 7/7 flyer for 5 and 2 green. Whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we will create that many treasure tokens. So far we are definitely heavy into the treasure token creating aspect of this deck, which is going to be very important because we want Miirym on the battlefield as much as possible, and I do sense that she will be a lightning rod for attention. Transitioning away from treasure tokens to a different source of mana generation, we have Savage Vetma, a 4/4 flyer for 4 in Gruul colors. Whenever it attacks, we add triple red and triple green to our mana pool, and until end of turn, we don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So we send Savage Vetma into combat, we get a total of 6 Gruul mana, 3 of each color of course, and until the end of our turn, we can use that mana any way we want. And lastly, for this subsection of the video, we have Cloth, Unrivaled Ancient, a 4/4 flyer with haste for 5 and Gruul colors. Whenever Cloth attacks, we add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. We can only spend this mana to cast spells. Until end of turn, we don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So this gives us a little bit of what Savage Vetma does with respect to the generation of the mana and allowing us to keep this mana in our mana pool until the end of our turn. However, the utilization of the mana is a little more restricted because we can only use it to cast spells. The following group of dragons is going to optimize our dragon engine. And when I say dragon engine, I mean putting cards into our hand and getting dragons onto the battlefield. And the first dragon we're going to talk about here is Dragonborn Champion, a 5/3 trampler for 2 in Gruul colors. Whenever a source we control deals 5 or more damage to a player, we will draw a card. We have numerous dragons in this deck with powers 5 or greater, in addition to some other tricks that we have later on in this deck tech. Remember, the source does not have to be a dragon. So with Dragonborn Champion on our side of the battlefield, we should be able to draw many, many cards. Speaking of the potential of drawing many, many cards, Ancient Silver Dragon is an 8/8 flyer for 6 in double blue, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we roll a d20. We then draw cards equal to the result, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Similar to what we were talking about with Ancient Copper Dragon, sending this bad boy into combat, connecting with combat damage, and then drawing, on average, 10 cards with no maximum hand size, that should spell doom to our opponents. Shifting away from card draw to dragon population, let's talk about Lothless Dragon Queen, a 6/6 flyer for 4 and 2 red. Whenever another non-token dragon ETBs under our control, we create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. And for every 1 in red we pay, dragons we control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Imagine having Lothless on the battlefield with a non-legendary copy provided by Miirym, and each time one non-token dragon ETBs under our control, we're putting a total of 10 power and toughness stretched across 2 dragon creatures onto our side of the battlefield. And finishing up this section of the deck tech, we have Utvara Hellkite, a 6/6 flyer for 6 in double red. Whenever a dragon we control attacks, we create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. Note the text on that. It does not need to deal combat damage. All it has to do is be declared as an attacker, and we put a 6/6 flying winged beast right onto our side of the battlefield. Imagine being able to do that twice if we also have a copy made from Miirym. The following group of dragons provides us an outlet for direct damage, the first of which is Lozon, Dragon's Legacy, a 4/2 flyer for 3 and Izzet colors. Whenever we cast an adventure spell, which I can stop you right here, there are no adventure spells in this deck, so we will further retcon this text by saying whenever we cast a dragon spell, Lozon deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target that isn't a commander. So as long as we're not boggled down by some troublesome or problematic commander for our opponents, we can send that damage to any creature they control, any planeswalker they control, or right to their life total. Next, we have Terror of the Peaks, a 5/4 flyer for 3 and 2 red. Spells our opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. I sense 3 life in the EDH format is not going to be a great commitment for attacks, particularly because of what Terror of the Peaks can do. Whenever another creature ETBs under our control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. If we are fortunate enough to have a copy of this generated by Miirym, we get to send that damage to 2 different targets or the same target twice. Next up, we have Wrathful Red Dragon, a 5/5 flyer for 3 and 2 red. Whenever a dragon we control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dragon. And to foreshadow right now, yes, as we get to the removal and disruption portion of this deck tech, Blasphemous Act is included because with Wrathful Red Dragon on our side of the battlefield and a number of other dragons, casting a Blasphemous Act could win us the game. Next up, we have Scourge of Valkus, a 4/4 flying dragon for 2 and triple red. Whenever it or another dragon ETBs under our control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons we control, and it also has fire breathing, meaning for every red mana you put into the Scourge of Valkus, it will get +1/+0 until end of turn. So if we are able to generate a copy of this with Miirym, we should be able to wipe our opponents right off the table because of the ETB abilities of having 2 different Scourge of Valkuses on our side of the battlefield. That means every single time that a dragon ETBs, we are going to be able to send that damage 2 times. And the last dragon for this subset of the video is going to be Drakuseth Maw of Flames, a 7/7 flyer for 4 and triple red. Whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. Now, this doesn't really have the same bang for its buck as the previous 4 dragons we talked about. However, if you think about having an additional copy of Drakuseth on our side of the battlefield from a Miirym token-generated ability, then we can turn 2 of these bad boys sideways, dealing a total of 20 points of direct damage, and that's before we even start tallying up the 14 points of combat damage. 2 Drakuseths on the battlefield, so much better than 1. This last group of dragons is going to help us to fortify and enhance our combat. The first of which we're going to talk about is Thrakkus the Butcher, a 3/4 trampler for 3 and Gruul colors. Whenever it attacks, we double the power of each dragon we control until end of turn. If we are fortunate enough to have a copy of this generated by Miirym, and we send both of them into combat, the powers of our dragons will double, and then double again. Next up, we have Hellkite Charger, a 5/5 flyer with haste for 4 and 2 red. Whenever it attacks, we may pay 5 and 2 red, and if we do, we untap all attacking creatures, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Paired with Thrakkus, that should mean lights out for our opponents, as long as we have the mana to activate its ability. Atarka World Render is a 6/4 flying trampler for 5 and Gruul colors. Whenever a dragon we control attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn. Unfortunately, a copy generated by Miirym will not give our dragons double strike. Unfortunately, that mechanic will not double, so just having 1 Atarka on the battlefield will be quite enough. Next up, we have the Balefire Dragon, a 6/6 flyer for 5 and 2 red. Whenever this deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. So if we are sitting at a table filled with tribal decks or token synergies, all we need to do is turn the Balefire sideways and watch so many of those creatures go straight to the graveyard. Maybe these creatures are getting even bigger and one Balefire Dragon isn't enough. That's why we have Miirym as our general. We get the Balefire into play, make a copy of it with Miirym's ETB ability, send both of those dragons at that opponent, and deal 12 damage to each of their creatures. And lastly, dragon number 5 of this subsection of the video, it does not help out the squad. It does not have any other abilities other than turning sideways and pounding face. It is the Earthquake Dragon. It's 10/10, it's flying, it's trample, its mana value is 14 and a green, but I promise you, we will never pay 14 and a green for this creature, because the Earthquake Dragon will cost X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of dragons we control. So a 10/10 guy that just wants to turn sideways and go right at our opponent's life totals, that's aces in our books, folks. In addition, it has a recursive ability. We can pay 2 and a green, we can sacrifice a land, and we can return Earthquake Dragon from our graveyard to our hand to resume face smashing. The cards in this section of the video are going to help us reduce the mana values of our dragons, put more cards into our hand, and maybe provide some benefits of peripheral mana generation. The first card in this section is Dragon Lord's Servant, a 1/3 Goblin Shaman for 1 and a red mana. Our dragon's mana value are reduced by 1 generic mana. Next up, we have Dragon Speaker Shaman, a 2/2 Human Barbarian Shaman for 1 and 2 red mana. Our dragon spells are now 2 less generic mana. And we also have Urza's Incubator, an artifact for 3 that when it ETBs, we choose a creature type. Of course, we'll choose dragons, and dragons will cost 2 generic mana less to cast. That's 5 generic mana right there, and that actually would help to pay the commander tax for our Lightning Rod of Attention commander over there, Miirym Sentinel Wyrm. Now let's talk about putting some cards in our hand. Are you going to pay 1 for that? Are you going to pay 1 for that? Do you want to pay 1 for that? Or do you want to pay 1 for that? That's what Ristic Study does, and that will put cards into our hand if our opponents do not want to pay the extra tax. Next, we have Sarkhan Fireblood, a planeswalker for 1 and 2 red. It ETBs with 3 loyalty counters. We can +1 Sarkhan, and we may discard a card, and if we do, we can draw a card. So we're kind of rummaging for cards there. We can also +1 Sarkhan to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, and we can spend this mana only to cast dragon spells. That was foreshadowed earlier with the benefits of the peripheral mana generation. And Sarkhan's Big Bang, -7, we create 4/5/5 red dragon creature tokens with flying. Sarkhan's card drawing and mana generating abilities are the reasons why he is included in the 99 of this deck. Next, we have Elemental Bond. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green. Simply stated, whenever a creature with power 3 or greater ETBs under our control, we're going to draw a card. And if Miirym is on our side of the battlefield while we also control Elemental Bond, we're going to draw a lot of cards. This is a dragon deck, and we're going to have so many creatures in the 99 of this build with a power 3 or greater. Moving up from a power of 3 to a power of 4, we have Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. This planeswalker ETBs with 7 loyalty counters for 2 generic mana and 1 of a Simic color. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater ETBs under our control, we get to draw a card. Jumping from 3 to 4 is not that high of a hurdle in a dragon deck. And it also has the benefit of -1 of a loyalty counter from Kiora to untap target permanent. That could be a land, which we could look at as some form of mana acceleration. That could be a mana rock, which we'll see later on in this video. Another card drawing enchantment, we have Temur Ascendancy for Temur colors. Creatures we control have haste, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater ETBs under our control, we may draw a card. Yes, I do think we'll draw that card. So this is going to give us Elemental Bond. I'm sorry, not Elemental Bond. I made a mistake. This is going to give us Kiora's ability, but it's also going to give all of our dragons haste. Garruk's Uprising is going to do something very similar. It's an enchantment for 2 and a green, and when it ETBs, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we get to draw a card, and we most certainly should. Creatures we control have trample, so that's going to provide another I guess we can say another form of evasion for the majority of our creatures that already have flying. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater ETBs under our control, we're going to draw a card. So this is Temur Ascendancy, shrunken down to just one color, and replacing the haste with trample, in addition to replacing itself if we have a creature with power 4 or greater when we cast that spell. So boy, oh boy, that is a lot of card draw, and we're not done yet. Next up, we're sticking with green enchantments, and we're going to include a copy of Greater Good. 2 and 2 green, we sacrifice a creature, and we draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. In a deck like this, where our dragons have such high powers, we should always come out on the better end of having cards in our hand, even after discarding 3 cards. And next up, another enchantment. This one we're going to shift from mono green to mono blue, and we're going to up the mana value by 1. Kindred Discovery. 3 and 2 blue. When it ETBs, we choose a creature type. Yes, we will choose dragons. Whenever a dragon ETBs or attacks under our control, we get to draw a card. So those dragons are going to keep coming into play. We're going to make sure that we're drawing those cards. We're going to send them into combat. We're going to draw even more cards. Cards in hand, very good. With cards in our hand, we're getting dragons into play. We're taking advantage of Miirym's ETB trigger, and we're making our opponents question whether they want to continue to play with us. The last card in this section, Sarkhan Unbroken, a planeswalker that ETBs with 4 loyalty counters for 2 generic mana and Temur colors. We can +1 Sarkhan to draw a card and add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. We can also take 2 loyalty counters off of Sarkhan to create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. And lastly, if we're fortunate enough to big bang Sarkhan by taking off 8 loyalty counters, we search our library for any number of dragon creature cards and put them onto the battlefield. Sarkhan Unbroken just seems to fit everything we want to do in this deck. It draws us cards, it creates mana, it creates dragon tokens, and if we're fortunate enough, it lets us go to our library and pull every dragon we want out of it and put it right onto the battlefield. This subsection of the video is very important because we want to make sure we're getting as many cards in our hand as possible in order to maintain tempo throughout the entirety of the game so that we can continue getting dragons onto our side of the battlefield. We can continue to get Miirym onto our side of the battlefield so that we can have those 2 dynamics synergize, creating the tokens and then just completely overwhelming our opponents because of our resources. The following cards are miscellaneous spells that are going to help us optimize the theme of this deck. And we're going to begin with Parallel Lives. Mono green enchantment for 3 and a green. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens, we put twice those many tokens onto the battlefield instead. So if we have Miirym on our side of the battlefield and a Parallel Lives, when that first dragon comes into play, Miirym's ability will trigger, creating not 1, but 2 token copies of that dragon. And if we're going to play Parallel Lives and we're in mono green, we might as well put some additional redundancy by including Doubling Season, an enchantment for 4 and a green. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under our control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. So this is Parallel Lives. In addition to putting counters onto permanents we control, it places twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead. So as I slowly shift Doubling Season to the right, fully showcasing Sarkhan Unbroken over on our left. If we have Doubling Season on our side of the battlefield and we get Sarkhan into play, it will enter with 8 loyalty counters, meaning we can take off all 8 and search our library for our entire Thunder of Dragons and get them onto the battlefield and win the game right on the spot. All right, next up we have Monster Manual, and I guess I lied earlier when I said there are no adventure spells in this deck. There certainly is, and we're looking at it right now, so please erase that portion of the video from your mind and replace it with Monster Manual. The adventure part of this is called Zoological Study. We pay 2 and a green, we mill 5 cards, and then return a creature card milled this way to our hand. I'm not so sure we want to cast this unless we're in dire straits, because we do not have a great number of effects that get things out of our graveyard and put them into our hands. So if we accidentally mill 4 important dragons that we need on the battlefield, it may be better served to just cast this for the Monster Manual part, which is the reason why it's here. For 3 and a green, this comes down as an artifact, and we can pay 1 and a green to put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. That is Quicksilver Amulet. Quicksilver Amulet is an artifact that costs 4 to cast and 4 to activate, which does the exact same thing as Monster Manual, although it only costs 1 and a green to do so. So we can get by with some of our bigger dragons or smaller dragons if we want to by just paying 1 and a green and turning Monster Manual sideways. Maybe we want to have our creatures available a little quicker than that, although we may not be able to hold on to them at the time. We also will play with a copy of Sneak Attack. Enchantment is 3 and a red. We can pay a red and put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. That creature gains haste, and then we sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. The synergy with Miirym is undeniable. If we have Miirym on our side of the battlefield, we can activate Sneak Attack to put the dragon from our hand into play, create the token copy with Miirym. The token copy will stick, but the original card that went from our hand to the battlefield will get sacrificed at the beginning of the end step. So we can definitely send that into combat right away, and we're still left with the copy thanks to our general. Since we are a dragon-focused deck, it just makes sense in the world that card number 1 to be included is Dragon Tempest, an enchantment for 1 and a red. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under our control, it gains haste until end of turn. Nearly every dragon in our deck has flying, so there are some that are not going to receive the benefit that Dragon Tempest provides. However, whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, it will deal X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons we control. This is like a Scourge of Valkus ability put onto a much more difficult to remove enchantment. But make no mistake about it, with the haste and the direct damage ability that Dragon Tempest provides, that is card number 1 to be included in any dragon deck that's sporting red. Speaking of mono-red enchantments that should go in most, if not all, red dragon decks, we have Aggravated Assault. For 2 and a green, we get to cast this and put it on our side of the battlefield, and then we can activate it for 3 and 2 red, and when we do, we untap all creatures we control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase, and we can play this ability only any time we could play a sorcery. So what's going to happen is we are going to attack during our combat phase, then we're going to use our mana during our second main phase, or our post-combat main phase, to activate Aggravated Assault, and then we are going to untap all of our creatures, and we're going to send them into combat again. And of course, if the Savage Vetma is on our side of the battlefield, which was one of the dragons we previewed earlier in this deck when we were talking about mana resource dragons, that was a dragon that whenever it attacks, we add 3 red and 3 green, and that mana stays in our mana pool until the end of our turn. Well, guess what? That's 6 total mana, and Aggravated Assault is only 5 to activate, so that in any combination of any other kinds of mana that we don't even need but just can be used as a backup, we can look at Aggravated Assault as a win condition. All right, the last section of this video is going to have a few cards that we're going to utilize to help protect Miirym. Miirym is going to be a lightning rod for attention, and specific to this build, I did not want to overwhelm the 99 with cards to protect her. I would rather and have decided to just increase the amount of mana sources so that we can just keep casting her from the command zone, as opposed to, creating 10 to 15 cards to protect her to keep her on the battlefield. Let's just make those 10 to 15 cards just mana resources so that we can keep recasting her, or that we can just get our other dragons onto the battlefield, because this deck can win without Miirym on the battlefield, but we want her on the battlefield because she's just so much fun. So the first card to protect her is Lightning Greaves. This equipment costs 2 to cast, 0 to equip, and an equipped creature has haste and shroud. The shroud will not bother us one bit because we have nothing that we really want to slap onto Miirym other than Lightning Greaves. Next up, we're going to play with a copy of Displace. It's an instant for 2 and a blue. We get to exile up to 2 target creatures we control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So what we could do is, if Miirym is targeted for removal by one of our opponents, we can cast Displace, exile her and maybe one other creature we control, have them both come back into play. The spell that was used to spot remove Miirym fizzles, and then, if we're fortunate enough, the creature that comes into play with Miirym will also come into play as another token copy, because both of those creatures will see themselves. And for the purposes of flipping a defensive card into an offensive one, we don't necessarily have to save this to protect Miirym. We can also exile 2 of our other dragons, have them come back into play, and then have them trigger Miirym's token generating ability and create 2 more copies of those dragons. A lot of what we said about Displace can also be said about Ghostly Flicker, except we can exile 2 artifacts, creatures, and or lands. So for some, we can get one of our mana rocks to come back into play untapped if we need some additional mana, or one of our lands, or again, we can just use this as Displace number 2, and that is Ghostly Flicker. And the last spell of this subsection of the video, which is going to help protect Miirym when she's on our side of the battlefield, it is Fierce Guardianship. It's an instant for 2 and a blue, but if we have Miirym on our side of the battlefield, it will cost us nothing. We will get to cast Fierce Guardianship without paying its mana value. And what it does is it counters target non-creature spell. More often than not, if something's going to remove Miirym, it's going to be an instant or a sorcery. The following cards are our removal and disruption suite. So let's get right to it, and let's talk about Pongify and the reason why this exists in blue. Seriously, 1 blue mana at instant speed to destroy target creature, and that creature cannot be regenerated. The creature's controller gets a 3/3 green ape creature token, but we don't care about a 3/3 token. We're playing dragons. So Pongify is absolutely ridiculous. And so much so was Rapid Hybridization, which is Pongify 2.0, except the creature's controller does not get a 3/3 green ape. They get a 3/3 green frog lizard. Ape, frog lizard, lizard ape, frog ape, we don't care. We're playing dragons. Next up, we have Vandal Blast. 1 red mana to destroy target artifact we don't control, or 4 generic mana and 1 red mana to destroy each artifact we don't control. Spot removal continues here with Reality Shift. 1 and a blue to exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. Now, for the purposes of ingenuity, if we know exactly what's on the top of our library through 1 mana or another, we could potentially cast Reality Shift on one of our tokens, getting rid of that, putting the card from the top of our library on our side of the battlefield as a 2/2 creature, and then eventually turn that bad boy face up. It's a couple of hoops to jump through, but it is a potential offensive capability, even though it is meant to be in the 99 as a defensive card. Next up, we have Hull Breach, a red and a green to destroy a target artifact, to destroy a target enchantment, or to destroy a target artifact and a target enchantment. Cast this for the 2. Always pick target artifact, always pick target enchantment. Get the biggest bang for your mana bucks. We're in blue, so yes, we have to include it. There is our obligatory copy of Cyclonic Rift. 1 in a blue to return target non-land permanent we don't control. 6 in a blue to return each non-land permanent we don't control to their owner's hands. It's in the deck, it's blue, it's not banned, we're going to play with it. Next up, Beast Within. Here we go. 2 in a green instant speed. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So similar to Pongify and similar to Rapid Hybridization. We don't care about tokens. We're playing dragons. Chaos Warp, instant speed, 2 in a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. So there is a little bit of risk involved here, particularly when it comes to getting one of your opponent's permanents into their library, and then they get to pull one out. I'm sure all of us watching this video right now, and you could let us know in the comment section below, what is your Chaos Warp story? The aforementioned spoiled copy of Blasphemous Act is right here. We will never pay 8 in a red for this sorcery because it's reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature on the battlefield. And when we do eventually cast it, it deals 13 damage to each creature. So with Wrathful Red Dragon on our side of the battlefield and a couple of other dragons as well, we cast this and we should be able to eliminate an opponent or 2. Granted, we'll need more than just a couple other dragons in order to pull that feat off, but it is included in the deck, not just for self-inflicted wounds, but also for the potential of it being a win condition. Speaking of win condition, and this pairs with some of the unbelievable amount of mana acceleration and ramp we have in this deck, we're going to put it in here because we could win the game with it. It is Comet Storm. X in double red with a multi-kicker of 1. We can choose target creature or player, then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked, and it deals X damage to each of them. When we were talking earlier about the Dragonborn Champion, and whenever a source deals at least 5 damage, we get to draw a card. Well, Comet Storm has that ability, and although we may not be able to use it always as a win condition, we can definitely use it as removal, and if needed, we can definitely use it to draw some cards when we have Dragonborn Champion on our side of the battlefield. And the last removal spell of this subsection of the video, it is Cloth's Will. It's an instant for X, 2 red and a green. We get to pick 1, but if we have Miirym on our side of the battlefield and we cast the spell, we can choose both. We can have Cloth's Will deal X damage to each creature without flying, or we can destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments. And of course, if our general is under our control, we can pick both of those. Just be careful. We do have a few creatures on this deck that do not have flying. Mana reducers, the Dragonborn Champion doesn't have flying. Thrakkus the Butcher doesn't have flying. So be aware of your board when you choose to cast Cloth's Will, and choose it for the what fits the point of the game that you are. I'm trying to spit out the last couple of words of this. Choose Cloth's Will and be cautious when you do so. These cards are our Mana Rocks and Mana Ramp spells, and the first one is Mana Crypt. It's free to cast, but it's going to cost you some life, most likely to keep on your side of the battlefield. Turn it sideways for 2 generic mana. The greatest artifact in our format, Soul Ring. 1 to cast, tap it for 2 generic mana. Arcane Signet, 2 to cast, tap it for 1 of our Teamer colors. Next up, we have Orb of Dragonkind, an artifact that costs 1 in a red. We pay a generic mana and tap this to add 2 mana in any combination of colors, but we can only spend this mana to cast dragon spells or activate abilities of dragons. So in a way, we can look at this as Arcane Signet number 2 for the purposes of casting our dragons or activating our dragons' abilities, as long as we have an additional generic mana floating around. As a second wall of text, we can pay our red mana, tap it, sacrifice the Orb of Dragonkind, and look at the top 7 cards of our library. We may reveal a dragon card from among them and put it into our hand, which could be uber important towards the end of a game. Another Mana Raucous Thought Vessel, 2 to cast. Tap it for 1 generic mana, and we have no maximum hand size. You have already seen the high number of card draw spells and effects we have in this deck. We do not want to discard them to our graveyard because some rule says we have to have 7 cards at the end of our turn. Let's have no maximum hand size and keep all of those cards in our hand. Farseek is 1 and a green, and it'll let us seek out an island or mountain card. Target number 1, Ketria Triome. The next 2 cards will be showcased at the same time because they do exactly the same thing, but they have different names. 3 Visits and Nature's Lore. Search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield. Notice it does not say basic forest card, so this could get you your Ketria Triome, this could get you your Breeding Pool, or that could get you your Stomping Ground. Next up, the same verse as the last. We've got Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. They're both exactly the same. They're 2 and a green. They're sorcery speed. Research our library for any 2 basic lands or reveal them. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into our hand. And the last Mana Rock and also last card in this subsection of the video, it is Dragon's Hoard. All right, we have an artifact for 3. So if we stop right here and we take a look at all the cards we've already presented here, there are only 2 cards that have a mana value higher than 2. That's Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. But both of those cards give us 2 lands, giving us a land drop and a land right to the battlefield. This is a mana value of 3, so this is only going to tap for 1 mana of any color, so this is going to be like an Arcane Signet. However, if it weren't for the high number of dragons that are going to enter our side of the battlefield, it's very likely that Dragon's Hoard would not be included in the 99 of this build because of its mana value of 3. Whenever a dragon ETB is under our control, we put a gold counter on this, and we can tap to remove a gold counter from it to draw a card. Tapping an artifact to draw a card just seems way too powerful for an artifact that synergizes with what we're doing in this deck and can provide that kind of peripheral card draw. Remember, tempo is going to be inordinately important in this type of deck. We want to hit the ground running and sprint through the early to mid game and then absolutely crush our opponents at the end. And to close out this deck tech, here is the land base. We are going to play with 4 basic islands. We are going to play with 4 basic mountains. And we are going to play with 4 basic forests. Alright, so that's 12 basics in the deck. 4 of each color, 4 islands, 4 mountains, and 4 forests. The following lands will all be able to provide us 1 mana of the colors we need, hopefully, if all the stars align. Of course, that is Command Tower, the greatest land in our format. It's going to tap for any one of our teamer colors. Same thing with Path of Ancestry. Unfortunately, it does ETB tapped, but we do get to hedge against that, because if we use the mana generated by this land to cast a dragon, we get to scry 1. It is a benefit, a nice peripheral benefit, just from tapping a land, as long as we don't get too hung up on it entering the battlefield tapped. The aforementioned Ketria Triome is going to come into play. It's going to give us any one of the colors we need, and if needed, we can cycle it away for 3 to draw a card. Haven of the Spirit Dragon gives us a generic mana for anything, and gives us 1 mana of any color we need, only to cast a dragon creature spell. As an additional benefit, we can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice this land to return target creature card or Ujin Planeswalker card from our graveyard to our hand. I can tell you Ujin's not in the deck, so this would be used to recur one of our dragons straight to our hand. And Exotic Orchard is not a guaranteed lock that it will act as Command Tower 2.0, but red, green, and blue, those are some pretty popular commander colors. So I think at a minimum, we can expect that the Exotic Orchard to act as a dual land, giving us at least one of the 2 colors we need in our 3-color deck. And next up, speaking of dual lands, the following lands are going to give us 2 mana. They're going to give us one of 2 different colors of mana. We're going to play with all of the possible shock lands. So we have Steam Vents, Stomping Ground, and Breeding Pool, which are all fetchable by the aforementioned ramp spells like Farseek, like 3 Visits, and like Nature's Lore. They're going to come into play tapped, but we can pay 2 life to have them come into play untapped. So those are the shock lands. Next up, because we are playing in Commander, we're going to play with the 3 fan lands. We've got our Training Center, our Spire Guarding, and Rejuvenating Springs. These will ETB untapped as long as we have 2 or more opponents. Again, this is Commander, so hopefully we will have those other opponents at the time we put those lands into play. The next lands are referred to as the slow lands, but in the format of Commander, they are go, 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 baby. We have our Storm-Carved Coast, our Rockfall Vale, and our Dreamroot Cascade. They enter the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or more other lands. This should never be a problem in Commander, particularly in a deck that features green. So having these bad boys come into play untapped, let's face it, they're going to be as close to dual lands as dual lands possibly can be in a deck that doesn't have the original dual lands. And the last set of lands here, although they don't tap for one of 2 different colors, you get to commit to 1 color before they enter the battlefield, and those are going to be our appropriate pathways. We've got the Riverglide pathway, the Craig Crown pathway, and the Bark Channel pathway. Of course, with the Riverglide, we can flip it over to be the Lava Glide. With the Craig Crown pathway, we can flip it over to get the green side, and with the Bark Channel pathway, we can flip it over to get the blue side. So although we can't tap them for one of any of the 2 colors that we need, we can definitely make that choice before putting it onto the battlefield. And you've already seen the amount of mana fixing in this deck and mana ramp. Fixing the mana should not be a problem, which is why there is a very high number of basic lands in this deck, because mana fixing should not be a problem. You've seen the amount of treasures we can create. You've seen the amount of peripheral mana generation we have. The mana rocks, the mana ramp spells. Mana fixing will not be a problem in this deck. And if it is, well, then we have a couple of fetch lands that we're going to add just to help that out. Scalding Tarn, Misty Rainforest, that will help you to get your Ketria Triome, help you to get one of the shock lands, or help you to just pluck one of the basics from the deck and put it right onto your side of the battlefield. All right, and all we have left are a few utility lands that we're going to talk about. And then that will bring this deck tech to a close. Reliquary Tower is going to be our Thought Vessel in land form. Tap it for a generic mana. We have no maximum hand size. We do not want to discard those cards to the graveyard, and we're going to make sure that we don't ever have to do that. Next up, we can consider this land to be a potential win condition. It is Kessig Wolf Run. It's going to tap for a generic mana, or we can pay X in Gruul colors to give target creature +X/+0 and trample until end of turn. Now, as you've seen the amount of mana generation we have in this deck, and if that's just sitting around and we're sending a dragon into play, well, our opponent has to look at that as a potential game-ending threat if we have Kessig Wolf Run on our side of the battlefield. Another utility land, not really so much utility as it is trying to get a little additional mana for our buck. We got Temple of the False God, tap for 2 generic mana, but we can only do so if we have 5 or more other lands. And lastly, card number 99 to bring this Miirym deck tech to a close It is Command Beacon that will tap for a generic mana, but much more importantly, because of the lightning rod of attention we can expect Miirym to have, we can tap and sacrifice Command Beacon to put Miirym into our hand from the command zone. It will be very important to make sure we have Miirym on our side of the battlefield if we're looking to synergize her ETB token creating effect. Again, as we talked about earlier during this deck tech, Miirym is not integral for us to win the game, but we are building the deck around her, so it is important to have as many ways to get her onto the battlefield as possible, and Command Beacon will allow us to get her into our hand, casting her or getting her into play without having to worry about any accumulated commander taxes. And there you have it, MTG BC. This is the Miirym Sentinel Wyrm deck tech. Let me know your thoughts in the description below. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. The description is for me to put things, not for you. And in that description below, you can also click to see the deck tech over at, you can also click to see the deck list over at tappedout.net. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.